A pleasant day to each and everyone. I am Almar Salazar Angagaw from Group 8 BSP 2A, and for today's video, I am going to discuss the Chapter 13, Old Age Personal and Social Adjustments.
But before we proceed to our formal discussion, allow me to introduce my team. I, Almar Salazar Angagaw, Mr. Henry Uy, Mr. John Paul Dilawangan, Mr. Dato Alnor Ryan Omar, and Miss Aleha Jean Jabar. And together, we will going to give our best to provide you an adequate and efficient knowledge about the topic. At this juncture, let us know first the objectives of our discussion. After reading this chapter, you should be able to Number 1. Explain why the period of old age is subdivided into two periods, the characteristics of each, and social attitudes regarding both periods. Number 2. Describe how most of the developmental tasks of old age relate more to the individual's personal life than to the life of others. Number 3. Recognize the major adjustments that the elderly must take to physical, motor, and psychological changes, and the effects these changes have on their attitude and behavior. Number 4. Give reasons why there are changes in interest in old age, and list the areas of interest in which these changes are most pronounced and the forms they take. Number 5. Discuss the interest in and concern about death that are characteristic of the elderly in the American culture today. Number 6. Identify and explain the potential physical hazards of old age. And number 7. Evaluate the serious effects on personal and social adjustments of the common psychological hazards of old age. Old age is the closing period in the lifespan. There is a period when people move away from previous more desirable periods or times of usefulness. As people move away from the earlier periods of their lives, they often look back on them, usually regretfully, and tend to live in the present, ignoring the future as much as possible. Ibig sabihin nito ay ang old age is considered to be the final stage or closing period in our lifespan as human being. Ito yung stage na kung saan ang ating elderly ay lumalayo na sa mga desirable periods, no? When we say lumalayo na sila sa desirable periods is that nawawalan na sila ng interest sa mga bagay na kung saan ay pleasurable at desirable para sa mga nasa adult stage. For example, ay magarbong bahay, magandang sasakyan, mamahaling mga damit, at even sa physical appearance nila. Kadalasan ay dito rin sa stage na ito nagaganap ang retirement sa kani-kanila mga trabaho. As these people move away from the earlier periods of their lives, kadalasan ay they tend to look back on their past. No? They tend to look back on their accomplishments, those mga times na sobrang saya nila, at saan na-develop yung experience nila. No, and guess what? And they often share this experience to the younger generations. No, they also regret dun sa mga opportunities na na-miss nila dahil sa lack of courage, but they are courageous and determined enough to live in the present. Age 60 is usually considered the dividing line between middle and old age. However, it is recognized that chronological age is a poor criterion to use in marking off the beginning of old age, because there are such marked differences among individuals in the age at which aging actually begins. So when someone reaches the age 60, it is already considered that person has already entered the old age stage, and during this old age there are physical changes, syempre, as we call the aging, na kung saan it is a process of growing old. Halimbawa nito ay ang pagkukulubot ng mga balat, pagkaputi ng entire hair, and etc. Because of better living conditions and better health care, most men and women today do not show the mental and physical signs of aging until the mid-60s or even the early 70s. For that reason, there is a gradual trend toward using 65, the age of retirement in many businesses, to mark the beginning of old age. However, some elderly has a better living conditions and better health care. That is why hindi na paghahalataan sa kanila yung process ng aging dahil na rin sa several healthcare and medicine na tinitake nila. People during 60s are usually referred to as elderly, no? Those people who already reach 60s is usually called elderly. Characteristics of old age. Like every other period in the lifespan, old age is characterized by certain physical and psychological changes. The effects of these changes determine to a large extent whether elderly men and women will make good or poor personal and social adjustments. The characteristics of old age, however, are far more likely to lead to poor adjustments than to good, and to unhappiness rather than to happiness. That is why old age is even more dreaded in the American culture of today than middle age, no? Kagaya ng ibang periods or stages ng lifespan, there are still physical and psychological changes sa old age. And depende pa rin sa epekto nitong changes na ito kung sila ba ay magkakaroon ng poor physical and social adjustments. However, kadalasan sa stage ng old age, it is more likely to lead to poor adjustments than to good and to unhappiness rather than to happiness. Yung epekto kasi ng physical and psychological changes during old age is so profound, meaning malakas or intense. Kasi nga may epekto na rito yung apprehension or yung anxiety and fear. Some of these changes including pagkaputi ng buhok, pagkulubot ng balat, madaling nakakalimot at iba pa. Old age is a period of decline. As has been stressed repeatedly, people are never static. Instead, they constantly change. During that early part of life, the changes are evolutional in that they lead to maturity of structure and functioning. In the latter part of life, by contrast, they are mainly involutional, involving a regression to earlier stages. These changes are the natural accompaniment of what is commonly known as aging. They affect physical as well as mental structures and functionings. May kasabihan nga tayo, people change and change is constant. Elderly people usually having decline or pagbaba or decrease sa kanilang strength, mental capacity, quality of life, and also value or yung halaga nila sa buhay. And also, they experience regression. No? When we talk about regression, ay parang bumabalik sila sa dati na less developed. Kagaya nung bata pa tayo, no? Our mind and experience are not fully developed. And kapag nasa old age ka na, it is a natural accompaniment of this what we call aging. It affects the elderly's physical and mental structures and functionings. The period during old age when physical and mental decline is slow and gradual, and when compensations can be made for these declines, is known as senescence, no? Or a time of growing old of aging. People may become senescent in their 50s or not until their early or late 60s, depending upon the rate of physical and mental decline. When we say senescence, the normal processings of elderly's mind become not normal. This stage begins the forgetfulness of an individual, as well as in physical. Wrinkles are a very normal part of getting older, as is worsening eyesight and hearing. The term senility is used to refer to the period during old age when a more or less complete physical breakdown takes place, and when there is mental disorganization. When we talk about senility naman, it is the physical and mental decline associated with old age. The individual in this stage become careless, absent-minded, socially withdrawn, and poorly adjusted is usually described as senile or senile. Senility may come as early as the 50s, no? Or it may never occur because the individual dies before deterioration sets in. Decline comes partly from physical and partly from psychological factors. Physical cause including wrinkles, pagkaputi ng buhok, worsening eyesight and hearing, and are all effects of aging, and it's not a disease, no? Tandaan natin yan. That occurs during old age. It is a normal process of aging. Lack of support sa sarili, sa ibang tao, sa trabaho, and life in general. Motivation likewise plays a very important role in decline. The individual who has little motivation to learn new things or to keep up to date in appearance, attitudes, or patterns of behavior will deteriorate. Now, when we say deteriorate, it is becoming worse, no? It is becoming worse much faster than one who is motivation to ward off aging is stronger. The new leisure time which comes with retirement or with the lessening of household responsibilities often brings boredom which lowers the individual's motivation. So yung leisure time na mga matatanda, usually yung mga household chores, yung mga trabaho nila sa bahay, no? Kapag nababawasan yon or nagiging hindi na nila nagagawa yon, is nagbe-bring yon ng pagiging bored or naboboredom sila, which is can lead to lower motivation for them. There are individual differences in the effects of aging. Today, even more than in the past, it is recognized that aging affects different people differently. People age differently because they have different hereditary endowments, different socioeconomic and educational backgrounds, and different patterns of living. As differences increase with age, they predispose individuals to react differently to the same situation. For example, some men think of retirement as a blessing, while others regard it as a curse. As a general rule, physical aging precedes mental aging, no? Better example of this ay ang mga mayayaman at may hirap na status sa buhay. For those who are capable to sustain their wants and need, retirement for them is a blessing kasi makakapagpahinga na sila. At syempre, secured no, yung existence nila or yung future nila kasi nga may kaya silang isustain yung daily living. However, for those who are not capable naman of sustaining their wants and needs, retirement for them is a curse, no? Kasi kapag nag-retire sila sa kanilang trabaho ay maaaring wala na silang makain o masustain para sa kanilang sarili. The reality kasi is that kapag may mga sari-sarili ng mga pamilya, yung mga anak ng mga elderly, ay they usually forgot about their parents. Pinagpapapasahan pa minsan, no? That's the problem. Kaya we cannot blame the elderly kung ituturing nila ang retirement as curse because walang magsusustain ng kanilang needs and wants sa buhay. Old age is judged by different criteria. Because the meaning of age is vague and undefined to young children, they tend to judge age in terms of physical appearance and activities, no? To them, children are smaller than adults and must be cared for, while adults are big and can take care of themselves. No, ito yung isa or one of the unfavorable social attitudes sa mga matatanda or sa mga elderly. Kasi itinuturing nila yung mga bata na sila ay yung maliit, ay sila yung smaller than adults, and sila yung dapat na inaalagaan, no? On the other hand, yung mga adults naman or yung mga nasa elderly stage ay usually malalaki na yan sila, no? And can take care of themselves. No, which is must need. No naman, both are needed, both were needed and attention and proper care. Kasi sa bata, they need guidance and sa elderly naman, they need assistance. By the time children reach adolescence, they judge old age in much the same way as adults do, namely in terms of the person's appearance and what the person can and cannot do. Knowing that these changes are the most two common criteria used to judge their ages, many elderly people do all they can to camouflage the telltale physical signs of aging by wearing clothes like those worn by younger people and trying to keep up a pace that often overtaxes their strength and energy. This is their attempt to create the illusion that they are not yet elderly or old. So yung mga matatanda into today's generation sa American culture ay napapressure din sila sa mga social attitudes, no? Yung mga unfavorable attitudes na pinapakita or pinaparamdam sa kanila ng kanilang society. That is why they tend to camouflage, no? They use rejuvenating sets, they use clothes that they may look younger just to hide the signs of aging. There are many stereotypes of old people. Television has made its contribution to stereotypes of the elderly. Because of the constant emphasis on the beauty and strength of youth, the elderly are made to seem unattractive and ineffectual by comparison. While television does not directly emphasize the negative aspects of age, indirectly it does so by its unfavorable comparison with the young. So ang sinasabi dito, yung mga television is mas pinapaboran nila yung mga kakayahan, yung mga pwedeng gawin ng mga youth or yung mga bata kaysa sa mga matatanda. Kasi pinapakita daw nila na yung mga elderly people in American culture today is unattractive and ineffectual. Ibig sabihin, pinaparamdam nila or pinapakita nila na yung pagiging unuseful ng mga elderly. Jokes and different forms of humor contribute to the unfavorable stereotypes of the elderly. For the most part, the foolishness rather than the wisdom of age is emphasized. This understandably leads to negative attitude that reinforce the already existing unfavorable stereotypes. So, yung mga jokes and different forms of humor also contribute to the hindi makatao or hindi equal na trato nila sa mga elderly, no? Kasi nagbibigay sila ng mga jokes which is exaggerated, no, para dun sa mga matatanda. Stereotypes have been reinforced by scientific studies of the age. So meron ding mga scientific studies na nagpapatunay na ang mga younger generations of people today are more efficient and useful than the elderly. Social attitudes toward old age. The significance of unfavorable social attitudes toward the elderly is that it affects the way elderly people are treated. No? So social attitudes naman ng mga old people towards old people is that there are so many unfavorable social attitudes toward them, and it affects, no, kung paano sila tratuhin ng isang tao. Kasi kung pinapakita mo sa inyong kultura or sa inyong American culture today, for example, pinapakita nila na ang elderly people ay mahina, wala nang magagawa. So ma-adapt ng mga people on America yung ganong klaseng attitudes toward old age. The elderly have a minority group status. In spite of the fact that the number of old people in America today is growing, they occupy a minority group status, a status that excludes them to some extent from interaction with other groups in the population and which gives them little or no power. So yung mga unfavorable attitudes toward the old age makes them create an organization or yung mga minority status para lang sa mga matatanda, no? Kasi nga na-feel nilang outcast sila sa mga younger people, no? So they tend to create a minority group status for them, no? Kasi nga the younger people or the adults excludes them from the interaction and from the other transaction, no? They give them the privacy or the opportunity to talk or to socialize with their co-age, no? Yung mga matatanda rin, which is unfavorable for the elderly people. This second-class citizenship puts the elderly on the defensive and has a marked effect on their personal and social adjustments. It makes the latter years of life far from golden years for most people, and it causes them to be victimized by some members of the majority group. Grabe, no? Dahil dito sa second-class citizenship or dito sa minority group status na na-create nila, yung dito sila nagkakaroon ng personal and social adjustments kasi nga nafe-feel nilang outcast sila sa mga younger generation, sa mga adult, which is they are often victimized by this majority group of people. Aging requires role changes. Just as middle-aged people must learn to play new roles, so must the elderly. In the American culture of today, where efficiency, strength, speed, and physical attractiveness are highly valued, elderly people are often regarded as useless. Why? Because they cannot compete with young people in the areas where highly valued traits are needed. The social attitude toward them is sobrang unfavorable. Because of these unfavorable social attitudes, few rewards are associated with old age roles, no matter how successful they are carried out. Feeling useless and unwanted early develop feelings of inferiority and resentment. When we say inferiority, they become their self become lower, no, lower class. Yun yung nafe-feel nila sa society nila ngayon. And resentment. When we say naman resentment, they are treated unfairly. They are treated unfairly by the majority group of people. Poor adjustment is characterized of old age. Because of the unfavorable social attitudes toward the elderly that are reflected in the way the social groups treats them, it is not surprising that many elderly people develop unfavorable self-concepts. These tend to be expressed in maladjusted behavior or different degrees of severity. Now, those who have a history of poor adjustments tend to become more maladjusted as age progresses than those who earlier personal and social adjustments were more favorable. The desire for rejuvenation is widespread in old age. The minority group status accorded to most elderly persons has naturally given rise to a desire to remain young as long as possible and to be rejuvenated when the signs of aging appear. So ito na, ang mga minority group people or yung mga elderly ay gumagamit pa rin sila ng mga rejuvenating, no, yung mga rejuvenating cells, or kung mayaman man sila, may healthcare sila, may clinic sila for their skins, no, to camouflage from the effects of this aging. And their desire to remain young as long as possible ay rampant, no. Yun nga, sabi ko kanina, they tend to camouflage, they tend to hide the effects of this aging. Developmental task of old age. Old age, adjusting to decreasing physical strength and health. So isa na rito yung pag-a-adjust nila, no, sa pagdi-decrease ng kanilang lakas, yung strength nila physically, and yung pag-decrease na rin ng yung mga immunization nila sa mga sakit, no, because they are already prone in different diseases and yung mga common nangyayari during aging. Adjusting to retirement and reduced income. Isa rin ito. So, kasi sa old age stage, ito na yung stage ng retirement and reduced income, no? Kapag nag-retire ka sa iyong trabaho, mawawalan ka na rin ng income or sapat na pera para sa iyo. Adjusting to death of spouse. So, ito rin, nag-adjust na rin sila na anytime, no? Ito nilalagay nila sa sarili nila, anytime maaaring mawala ang aking asawa, maaaring mawala ang aking kinakasama. So at least nakapag-adjust na sila if anything happens. Establishing an explicit affiliation with members of one's age group. So ito na rin yung isa sa dahil sa unfavorable social attitudes na nag-establish sila ng sarili ng organization na yung laman ng organization, yung mga members ng organization na yun ay pareho nilang mga elderly people. Establishing satisfactory physical living arrangements, no, yung they are also establishing a satisfaction with their living arrangements. Adapting to social roles in a flexible way. So dahil sa unfavorable social attitudes ay nag-a-adapt sila ng new social roles in a more flexible way, kasi kapag nagkapalya or nagkaroon ng problema ay mag-a-adjust na naman sila into another. It is unquestionably true that physical changes do occur with aging, and that these changes are for the most part in the direction of deterioration. It means It is true that during this old age stage, physical changes are very rampant, no? Hindi na yan maiiwasan kasabay ng aging or yung pagtanda. And also, sinasabi rito na those physical changes are from the most part may patungo na rin sa deterioration or yung pagiging worse or yung declining of an individual. The organs of reproduction age sooner than the other organs. So it means yung mga organs sa reproductive system ng isang elderly or sa isang old people ay nauunang tumanda, no, age sooner than the other organs, than sa ibang organs or sa ibang parts ng kanyang katawan. Some common problems unique to old age. Number 1, making new friends to replace those who have died or moved away or who are invalided. So why is this considered to be one of the most common problems that is unique only to old age? No, it is because making new friends sa stage ng old age is very difficult, no? Kasi the younger generations or the adults in today's generation is that they found old age as a boredom, no, or bored kausap, bored magkasama, at hindi gaanong kawili-wiling kasama sa usapan sa mga gimmick ganyan. Number 2, developing new activities to occupy increased leisure time. So isa rin ito sa common problems that is unique to old age because that they are having difficulties in making or developing new activities, no? Kasi yung mga dating activities or mga leisure time nila ay nahihirapan na silang gawin iyon dahil nga sa kakulangan ng strength, decrease in mental capacity, in physical strength, and many more. And number 3, being victimized or taken advantage of by salespersons, hoodlums, and criminals because they are unable to defend themselves. No, this is very common in the old age. They are not able to defend themselves to make negotiations. That's why they were being taken advantage by the salespersons, no? Yung mga pag-increase ng price, ganun, tinataasan sila ng price, nakukuha sila through negotiation, nabibictims ng mga hoodlums and criminals, no, because they are not able to defend or to defend themselves. Common changes in appearance during old age. So ito na yung mga common na pagbabago, no, sa physical appearance ng mga elderly during their old age. Sa head region or sa may bandang ulo, the nose begins to elongate, the mouth changes shape as a result of tooth loss or the necessity of wearing dentures. The eyes seem dull and lusterless and often have a watery look. A double or triple chin develops. The cheeks become pendulous, wrinkled, and baggy. The skin becomes wrinkled and dry, and dark spots, moles, or once warts may appear. The hair on the head becomes thin and turns gray or white, and tough, bristly hair appears in the nose, ears, and eyebrows. So ito yung mga common changes, physical changes sa may head region or sa may bandang head ng isang elderly. On the other hand, sa trunk region naman, the shoulders stoop and thus seem smaller. The abdomen bulges and droops. The hips seem flabbier and broader than they did earlier. The waistline broadens, giving the trunk a sack-like appearance. The woman's breasts become flabby and droop. So these are the common physical changes in the trunk region, no? And lastly, the limbs. The upper arm becomes flabby and heavy while the lower arm seems to shrink in diameter. The legs become flabby and the veins prominent, especially around the ankles. The hands become scrawny and the veins on the back of the hand are prominent. The feet become larger as a result of sagging. Muscles and corns, bunions, and calluses often appear. The nails of the hand and feet become thick, tough, and brittle. So these are the common changes in physical appearance during old age. So as you observe, halos lahat ng parte ng katawan ng isang elderly people ay nagkakaroon ng physical changes. Internal changes. Although internal changes are not as readily observable as external ones, they are nevertheless as pronounced and as widespread. Changes in the nervous system are especially marked in the case of the brain. Central nervous system changes come early in the aging period. They are reflected first in a decrease in the speed of learning and later in decline in intellectual powers. So we all know that the central nervous system is responsible in all of the movements of our body, no? So this accompany with the decline in the speed of learning, no, the gaining of knowledge, no, that the gaining of knowledge during elderly or this old age stage becomes decreased, or the decline is rampant, and also the decline in intellectual powers is also prominent in this stage. So these are the changes in physiological functions during old age. Number one is the changes in functioning of the organs. Regulation of body temperature is influenced by impairment of the regulatory devices. Old people cannot tolerate extremes of temperature, either hot or cold, because of the decreased vascularity of the skin. No, yun din sa pangalawa, old people cannot tolerate extremes of temperature. And most old people suffer from insomnia, no? Especially trivia lang, especially for the women, they suffer mostly in insomnia rather than the men. And also we have digestive changes, no, are perhaps the most marked of the changes in the regulatory functions. No, difficulties in eating are due partly to loss of teeth, which is fairly universal in old age, and also to the fact that the senses of smell and taste become less acute, making even the best food seem somewhat tasteless. No, and lastly, strength and the ability to work also decrease, no, as muscular flabbiness and general weakness make it more difficult for old people to use their muscles. Next one is sexual changes. The male climacteric comes later than the menopause and requires more time. Generally, there is a decline in sexual potency during the 60s, which continues as age advances. Like the menopause, no, it is accompanied by a decline in gonadal functioning, which is responsible for the changes that occur during the climacteric stage. Number two is that the male climacteric has two common effects. First, no, there is a waning of the secondary sex characteristics. The voice, for example, become higher in pitch, the hair on the face and body become less luxuriant, and the heavy musculature gives way to the general flabbiness, no. And second is the male climacteric affects sexual functioning. Number three, the male climacteric usually affects the sexual functioning, no? Gaya nga nung sabi ko, even though sexual potency has declined, there is not necessarily a decline in sexual desire or in the ability to have intercourse. And lastly, the strength of the sex drive in old age will depend largely upon the individual's general health and the kind of sexual adjustments made in earlier life. So those who made poor sexual adjustments when they were younger have been found to lose the sex drive earlier than those who made better adjustments. Next in line is the common changes in sensory functioning in old age. Number one is the vision. There is a consistent decline in the ability to see at low levels of illumination and a decline in color sensitivity. Most old people suffer from presbyopia, no, farsightedness, which is due to the diminishing elasticity of the lenses. So, kung ma-observe natin, yung mga elderly is usually hindi sila nakakakita ng malayo, no, they usually tend to make a closer look, no, to those things na pinapakita nyo sa kanila kasi nga they have this decline in their vision. Next is the hearing. Old people lose the ability to hear extremely high tones as a result of atrophy of the nerve and the end organs in the basal turn of the cochlea. Although most can hear tones below high C as well as younger people, men tend to experience greater hearing loss in old age than women. So dito naman sa hearing, no, kung na-observe natin sa mga old people or sa elderly is that they cannot hear from afar, no. Kailangan ilapit pa nila yung tenga nila sa bibig natin para marinig nila kung ano ba yung ipinaparating natin sa kanila. Next is the taste. Marked changes in taste in old age are due to atrophy of the taste buds in the tongue and the inner surface of the cheeks. This atrophy becomes progressively more widespread with advancing age. So yung kakaroon din sila ng problema sa kanilang panlasa, no. Usually yung mga masasarap na pagkain, those that are tasty foods are not likely, no, na nalalasahan ng mga nasa old age or yung mga nasa elderly because of this decline in their taste. Next one is the smell. The sense of smell becomes less acute with age, partly as a result of the atrophy of cells in the nose and partly because of the increased hairness of the nostrils. Nagkakaroon din sila ng problema sa kanilang smell, no. They cannot smell the foods or any substance or any things that has smell, no. They cannot smell it in an inadequate way. Next is touch. As the skin becomes drier and harder, the sense of touch becomes less and less acute. Ganon din sa touch, no. Nagkakaroon din ng problema sa touch as the elderly people age sooner. And lastly, sensitivity to pain. The decline in the sensitivity to pain occurs at different rates in different parts of the body. There is a greater decline, for example, in the forehead and arms than in the legs. Next is common changes in motor abilities in old age. Number 1 is the strength. Decline in strength is most pronounced in the flexor muscles of the forearms and in the muscles which raise the body. Elderly people tire quickly and require longer time to recover from fatigue than younger people. So this is very self-explanatory, no? Because of because of this aging, no, or this effect of aging to the old people or the elderly, their physical strength, no, become lesser, no, as they cannot work more longer, no, kasi nga mabilis silang mapagod. Next is speed. Decrease in speed with aging is shown in test of reaction time and skilled movements such as handwriting. It is especially marked after age 60. So very self-explanatory din, no. The speed, they have this reduce in speed, no, especially in doing things. Mabagal talaga sila, need pa silang alalayan, need pa ng accompany ng kanilang mga mahal sa buhay. Next is learning new skills. Even when the elderly believe that learning new skills will benefit them personally, they learn more slowly than younger people, and the end results tend to be less satisfactory. So, ito na rin, nagkakaroon na rin sila ng problema or changes in learning new knowledge or learning new skills in their lives, no, because of the decline in their mental capacities as well. Lastly is awkwardness. Old people tend to become awkward and clumsy, which causes them to spill and drop things, to trip and fall, and do the things in a careless, untidy manner. The breakdown in motor skills proceeds in inverse order to that in which the skills were learned, with the earliest learned skills being retained longest. Changes in mental abilities in old age. Psychologists, from the results of their studies, have confirmed the popular belief that with the trend toward decline in other areas, there would automatically be decline in mental abilities as well. So ayon sa researches or the studies of the psychologist, kung saan ay nagkakaroon ng decline in physical, in their emotional, in their learning skills and everything, and there is also decline in their mental abilities as well, no? According to the research of certain psychologists. Those who continue to work as they reach the latter years of life have normal brain functioning and do better on intelligence tests than those who are idle. So, very understandable naman na yung mga nagtatrabaho pa rin, those elderly people who were not retired in their work, usually yung process ng brain nila is still on the average stage, no, which is nakaka-cope up sila ng new knowledge, nakakapag-learn sila ng new skills because of the continuous learning, no, that they are doing. So that's all for my discussion for today. I hope that you learn a wide variety of knowledge, and lastly, thank you for lending your ears. I, Almar Salazar Engagao, saying that thank you for watching.
Good day, everyone. I am Henry S. Uy from Bachelor of Science in Psychology. In this video, I will be discussing the changes in interest in old age. Changes in interest in old age. Like the physical, psychological, and lifestyle changes in old age, changes in interest are inevitable. So, as we grow older, hindi natin naiiwasan na magkaroon ng mga changes like physical, for example, physical appearance, sensory, and sexual change. Ganon din sa ating interest, no? As we grow older, hindi natin naiiwasan na magkaroon ng mga changes sa ating interest about sa mga bagay-bagay. There is a close correlation between the number of interest people at all ages have and the success of their adjustments. This in turn determines how happy or unhappy they will be in old age. This is just as true as at other ages in the lifespan. It is important to recognize, however, that adjustments in old age are markedly influenced by whether changes in interest are voluntary or involuntary. If elderly people want to change their interest because of health, financial situation, or any other reason, they will be better satisfied than if they must give up activities because of unfavorable attitudes on the part of the social group. Like the interests of people at every age level, those of the elderly differ markedly. However, certain interests may be regarded as typical of old age: personal interest, recreational interest, social interest, religious interest, and interest in death. Personal interests. Personal interests in old age include interest in self, interest in appearance, interest in clothes, and interest in money. First, let's talk about interest in self. People become increasingly more preoccupied with themselves as they grow older. So, as people grow older, they may become egocentric and self centered to the point where they think more about themselves than about others and have little regard for others' interests and wishes. Even when they are in a good physical condition, older people are often preoccupied with their health and with the bodily processes. They tend to complain about their health and to exaggerate any ailment they may have. They also show their preoccupation with themselves by talking endlessly about their past, expecting to be waited on, and wanting to be the center of attention. This self-centeredness contributes to the unfavorable social attitude toward all people that is so prevalent today. Younger people who are aware of the social expectation of cooperativeness and unselfishness often find the self-centeredness of old people completely contradictory to their standards of socially acceptable behavior. So next is interest in appearance. Although some old people are as concerned about their appearance as they were when they were younger, many show little interest in how they look. So, as people getting older, they may cease to care about their clothes or become careless about grooming. While few are dirty and slovenly in appearance, most elderly people do not take the time and trouble to make the most of their looks or to camouflage the telltale signs of physical aging as well they could. There are a number of explanations for decline in interest in appearance with advancing age. The more socially active people are, the more insensitive they have to be careful about their looks. Socially withdrawn people, by contrast, have far less motivation to keep up their appearance. The economic status of elderly is an important factor in the degree of interest they have in appearance. When every penny must be counted and when some of the necessities of life must be schemed on money to improve one's appearance is considered a luxury that cannot be afforded. Place of residence also plays an important role in determining how great an interest the elderly have in their appearance. Those who live alone have far less interest than those who live with grown children or in homes for the retired elderly. The sex of elderly influences their attitudes toward appearance. Old men as a group tend to be more interested in their appearance than old women. This is directly contrast to the situation earlier and may be explained partly by habit and partly by economic conditions. Many older men and older women who work during early adulthood or middle age have developed the habit of careful grooming because it was important to them in their work. This habit often persists after retirement. Older women who spent their younger years mainly in the home tend to be less careful of their appearance in old age, just as they were when they were younger. The sex difference in interest in appearance may also be due in part of economic conditions. It costs less for men to be well groomed than for women who not only need more up-to-date and larger assortment of clothes than men but also must buy beauty aids in the form of cosmetics, permanent waves, etc. Many men after retirement have wardrobe left from their working years that will continue to serve them well. This does not apply to former working women because constant changes in fashion sense make their wardrobes out of style. So next is interest in clothes. Interest in clothes depends to some extent upon how socially active the elderly are, partly on their economic status and partly on how willing they are to accept the fact that they are growing old and must adjust to it. So, some elderly people continue to wear styles they wore earlier and refuse to dress according to the current fashion, even when it means that they must have their garments made to order. Other older people, by contrast, are very fashion conscious and may choose clothes that are designed for those young enough to be their children or even their grandchildren. They are rebelling against old age and are trying to convince themselves and others that they are younger than they really are. Limited incomes prevent many elderly people from having as great as interest in their clothes and appearance as they might otherwise have. They simply do not have enough money to buy new clothes except when it's absolutely necessary. Lack of income also contributes to the social withdrawal of many elderly people. If they cannot afford to be well dressed, they tend to shun social activities for fear that they will be embarrassed by their shabby and out-of-date appearance. This is especially true of women because women's clothing styles change faster than those of men. Older people's interest in clothing is also affected by the difficulty they have finding ready-made clothes that are stylish and yet fit their aging figures. When short skirts are involved, for example, it is hard for an older woman to find a ready-made dress, skirt, or coat of a length that she considers appropriate for her age. Also, clothing intended for elderly women is often poorly designed, uninteresting, and made in prints or colors that are unflattering to the older woman's skin and hair. The problem of finding ready-made clothes that are becoming affects elderly men also, but less than it affects women. So next is interest in money. Interest in money, which starts to wane during middle age, generally it survives and becomes more intense as old age progresses. Retirement or unemployment may leave the elderly with greatly reduced incomes or with no income at all unless they are eligible for Social Security or welfare relief. This focuses their attention on money and stimulates their interest in how they can get more money or make ends meet with what they have. When the income of elderly people is drastically reduced, their interest in money is focused not on what they want to buy and on the purchase of status symbols, as it often true in the earlier years, but on how they can maintain their independence, how they can live where and how they want without relying on relatives or charity. In order to maintain the pattern of life they prefer even when simpler than what they have grown accustomed Many older people are forced to cut down their expenditures for clothes and grooming aids, for social activities and recreations, and for memberships in different community organizations. Travel and vacation away from home except when visiting friends or relatives often becomes impossible for many elderly people. Here are some common conditions affecting change of interest in all age. First is health. Changes in health and energy are reflected in increased interest in sedentary pursuit and decreased interest in activities requiring strength and energy. Social status. Older people of the higher social groups usually have a wider range of interests than those of the lower groups. Many of these are carryovers of interests developed earlier in life. Economic status. Older people who have inadequate money to meet their daily needs often have to give up many other interests that are important to them and concentrate on the ones they can afford, regardless of whether they are meaningful to them or meet their needs. Next is place of residence. Where elderly people live has marked influence on whether their earlier interests will persist or change. If they live in their own homes with family members, their interests are far more likely to remain static than if they go to live with married children or in retirement home. Sex. Women as a group have more interest in old age than do men, just as they do throughout adulthood, because of few interests they developed when they were younger. Many older men after retirement find it difficult to cultivate interests to occupy their time. Marital status. Just as unmarried men and women in early adulthood and middle age have more time and money to cultivate interests than do those who are married, so do unmarried in old age. Some of their interests may be new, but most of carryovers from younger years. Values. As values change, so do interests at every age. In old age, value change are common and usually toward conservatism. This affects the relative value they place on their interests. Older people, for example, may come to value social contacts rather than hobbies, compensation for the loneliness caused by loss of spouse. Now we are here in recreational interests. Elderly men and women tend to remain interested in the recreational activities they enjoy in early adulthood, and they change these interests only when necessary. Changes that occur consist mainly of a gradual narrowing down of interest rather than a radical change in pattern, and shifts toward more sedentary forms of recreation. Causes of change recreational activities. While it is more unusual than usual for older people to cultivate new recreational interests, they are often to devote their time to recreation that interested them when they were younger, but which they had to put aside because of the pressures of work or family life or for some other reasons. Women, for example, who enjoyed painting when she was younger but had to give it up during the busy years of homemaking or and child rearing may become interested in it again in old age. Some changes in recreational activities are inevitable. So here are the common conditions responsible for changes in recreational activities. First is health. As health gradually fails and as physical disabilities such as poor eyesight set in, the individual acquires an interest in recreational activities that require a minimum of strength and energy and can be enjoyed in the home. Economic status. Reduced income after retirement may force the cutting down on or elimination of recreational activities, such as moving going, that cost money. This is especially true of people that in the lower socioeconomic groups. So next is education. The more formal education a person has, the more intellectual recreational activities such as reading will be cultivated because these require little energy. They can be enjoyed in old age. Those with limited education must often depend mainly on television for recreation. Next is marital status. Elderly people who have been accustomed to engaging in recreation with their spouse must make radical changes in their patterns after the loss of spouse through divorce or death. A woman accustomed to playing cards or going to community clubs with her husband may have to cultivate new recreational interests when she is left alone. Next is sex. Women tend to cultivate a wide range of recreational interests throughout life. Many of these are sedentary in nature and thus can be carried into old age. Men, by contrast, tend to limit their recreational interest to sports, which they must give up when their health fails. Thus, they have a paucity of recreational interest in all age and may depend mainly on television. Next is living condition. Elderly persons who live in a home for the aged have recreation provided for them that are suited for their physical and mental abilities. Those who live in their own homes or with a married child have fewer opportunities for recreation, especially if the economic status is poor or if feeling, health, or transportation problems prevent them from participating in community sponsors recreational activities. Common recreational activities in old age. Common recreational activities of older people include reading, writing letters, listening to the radio, watching television, visiting friends and relatives, sewing, embroidering, gardening, traveling, playing cards, going to the theater or movies, and taking part in the activities of civic, political, or religious organization. Social interests. With advancing age, most people suffer increasing social loss or social disengagement, a process of mutual withdrawal of the age from the social environment. Social disengagement in all age is commonly expressed in a narrowing down of the sources of social contact and a decline in social participation. For most older people, this means a radical change in the pattern of social life they established during early adulthood and carry on with only minor changes through middle age. Kinds of social disengagement. Social disengagement may be voluntary or involuntary. In the case of voluntary social disengagement, elderly people withdraw from social activities because they feel that such activities no longer meet their needs. As their interest in themselves increases, their interest in others decreases until their social interests are limited to their immediate families. The more socially isolated elderly people are, the more ingrown they become and the fewer opportunities they have to keep up to date. As a result, they become boring to others. This further adds to their social isolation. And when it comes to involuntary, social disengagements come from elderly people want and need social contacts but are deprived of the opportunities to have them because of conditions over which they have little or no control. When, for example, many of their contemporaries have died or have moved away or are physically or economically unable to do things with them, elderly people no longer have the companionship they merely enjoy. Elderly people may also lack of the strength or the means of transportation to see their friends. If their incomes is limited, they may not be able to participate in church or other community activities, and they often find it difficult or impossible to keep up with the space set by their younger relatives or friends. Equally serious is the unfavorable social attitude toward elderly, which contributes its share to their involuntary social disengagement. Sources of social contact. Sources of social contact of the different sources of possible social contact in all age, three are greatly affected by aging. These are close personal friendships, cliques, and formal groups or clubs. First, let's talk about close personal friendships. Close personal friendships. Close personal friendships with members of the same sex, many of which date back to adolescence or the early years of marriage, often end when one of the friends dies or moves away, and it is unlikely the old person will be able to establish another such relationships. Friendships cliques. These cliques are made up of couples who bonded together when they were younger because of mutual interest stemming from the husband's business associations or because of the wife's mutual interest in their families or community organization. As men retire and women's home and community activities dwindle, the members have little left in common and gradually drift apart. Last is formal groups or clubs. As leadership roles in former groups and clubs are taken over by younger members and as the activities are planned mainly around their interests, older people feel unwanted in these organizations and discontinue their membership in them. Social participation. With advancing age, participation in social activities declines and its scopes narrows. There is a rapid decline in membership and activities in community organizations after 60 or for men. After retirement, there is less attendance at the meetings of community organization and a tendency to take a less active part in the running of the organizations. There are many reasons for decline in social participation with advancing age. While declining health is generally believed to be the main reason, this is not always the case. Other reasons are important and sometimes even more important. The extent of participation in social activities when younger has a marked influence on participation in old age. Studies of social participation at different ages have shown that those who are active in adolescence and early adulthood continue to be active in middle and old age, except when such obstacles as poor health, economic privations, or family responsibilities prevent them from being so. Religious interest. Although it is popularly believed that people turn to religion as life draws to a close, there is little evidence to support this belief. While elderly people may become more religious as death approaches, or if they are seriously disabled, the average elderly person does not necessarily turn to religion in the sense that it becomes a new interest or a new focal point of attention. An analysis of research studies relating to attitudes towards religion and religious practice in all age has provided some evidence of greater interest in religion with advancing age and some evidence of declining interest. Instead of turn to or away from religion in all age, most people carry on the religious beliefs and habits formed earlier in life. However, certain changes in religious interests and attitudes are typical of older people in the American culture of today. The most common of these changes and the effects they have on personal and social adjustment during old age are religious tolerance, religious beliefs, religious observance. First, let's talk about religious tolerance. With advancing age, the individual adheres less strictly to religious dogmas and adopts a more lenient attitude toward the church, the clergy, and people of the different faiths. Religious belief. Changes in religious belief during all age are generally in the direction of acceptance of traditional belief associated with the individual's faith. Religious observance. Decline in church attendance and participation in church activities in all age is due to less lack of interest than to factors such as failing health, lack of transportation, embarrassment about not having proper clothing or being able to contribute money, and feeling unwanted by younger members of the church organization. Women continue to participate in church activities more than men do because of the opportunities offered for social contacts. Interest in death. During childhood, adolescence, and to a lesser extent, early adulthood, interest in death revolves more around life after death than around what causes a person to die, as a result of religious training in the home, Sunday school, and church. Many young people have distinct concepts of heaven or hell and about afterlife. So as people become older, they usually become less interested in life after death, and more concerned about death per se and about their own death. This is especially true of elderly people whose physical or mental condition has begun to deteriorate. When health fails, they tend to concentrate on death and to become preoccupied with it, in direct contrast to younger people to whom death seems very far away and it's thus are little concern to them. When interest in death shifts from interest in afterlife characteristics of the younger years to interest in the individual's own death, characterized of all age stage of the lifespan, research studies have shown that this interest takes many forms. There are 5 major questions that almost all elderly people ask themselves or others at some times or other. However, it is important to note that even when these questions dominate interest in death, among the elderly, they may and often do still fear death because of the uncertainty about whether there is an afterlife and what it will be like. The first question is, when will I die? The first question about death that is of profound interest to many elderly people is, when will I die? While they know that no one can predict this with any degree of accuracy, not even the ablest doctor or life insurance actuaries, they try to estimate approximately how much longer they have to live on the basis of the longevity of family members and the present state of their health. Even elderly people who have no fear of death may want to know how much time they have left because of what they regard as unfinished business in their lives, a trip they had always planned to take, or want their doctors to be frank about impending death so that they can tend to this to this unfinished business or settle their affairs. The next question is, what is likely to cause my death? The second question about death that concerns many elderly people, what is likely to cause my death? While statistics shows that heart disease, cancer, strokes, and accidents are the most common causes of death among the elderly, many die from other causes. Interest in the questions of what will cause death in the individual's case centers around four major areas of concern. First, elderly people wonder whether they can do anything to ward off their death, even for a short time. For example, if they know they are in danger of having a stroke because of high blood pressure, they may try to lower it by relaxing, by carefully prescribing diets, by losing weight, and by taking medication prescribed by their doctors. The second concern about what will cause death stems from the desire to take care of unfinished business, as discussed above, knowing that probable cause of death will give them some idea of the time remaining for them to accomplish or complete their unfinished business, because some disease progress more rapidly than others. Financial consideration is the third concern relating to the probable cause of death. If, for example, people have reason to suspect that they may die as a result of a heart attack which comes quickly and is not likely to involve a long period of invalidism, they may adopt an eat, drink, and be merry philosophy about their money, as opposed to those who believe their death will be a slow and lingering process and will involve great medical expenses for them or for their family. Fourth, many elderly people want to know what the cause of their death will be, because this determines whether their last days will be debilitating and painful, or whether they have a good chance of remaining mentally alert and physically active until the end. This is important because it will influence their decisions about what medical treatment they will seek, whether they will be willing to undergo an operation, or whether they will be considered committing suicide. Next is the third question about death that many elderly people ask is, what can I do to die as I wish to die? In the past, most men and women accepted the belief that death is a matter of God's will, and that the individual should have no choice in the matter. Today is a growing tendency fostered by those who believe in the euthanasia, and backed by the theories of some members of the medical, psychological, psychiatric, and legal profession, as well as by some members of the clergy, to believe that people should have some say about how they will die and even when they will die. Proponents of euthanasia or mercy killing believe that those who are suffering from painful, incurable disease or who are hopelessly injured should be put to death, or be allowed to die peacefully by doing nothing to prolong their lives, such as performing surgery, or by giving artificial respiration or blood transfusion. However, such solutions to the problem of the hopelessly ill or injured are the subject of heated legal, religious, and medical debate, a debate which the present time has reached no conclusion. The fourth questions that some elderly people ask themselves is whether they are justified in taking their lives. If, for one reason or other, they find a life has become unbearable in spite of strong religious prohibitions and unfavorable social attitudes towards suicide, are elderly people who believe they have the right to die in dignity and peace and be spared a long debilitating illness that may sap the energies and financial resources. All family members sometimes feel they are justified in taking their own lives while still physically and mentally able to do so. They believe, however, that they are justified in this only after a careful and accurate medical diagnosis has shown that there is no hope of recovery. Even if earlier moral and religious training emphasize the wrongful nature of suicide, their personal beliefs may be strong enough to counteract any feelings of guilt about committing such an act. More and more people in the American culture of today and are accepting the belief that there are times when suicide is justified. The fifth question many elderly people ask is how can they have good death while a good death may have different meanings for different people? Most elderly people agree that it can be considered good if, as Scholes has pointed out, three important personal needs are met. The first of these needs is control of pain. While modern medicine is unable to control all pain, every elderly person wants to have as painless death as possible. The second important need is maintenance of dignity by giving an elderly person about to die an opportunity to participate in decision making. This may relate to whether or not to operate or whether or not to continue to use life-saving measures when there is adequate medical evidence that the patient will never again be physically or mentally normal. The third important need of all elderly people who are approaching death is affection and love from those who are caring of them. These are shown by willingness to listen, understand, sympathize, and give assurance that their wishes will be followed. Sex difference in interest in death. Because psychological research relating to interest in and attitudes toward death is of such recent origin, few studies have investigated sex, socioeconomic, religious, or other differences. For the most part, men focus their attention on their own death, what will cause them when they will occur, etc., while they may be interested in the death of their wives, children, close friends, and relatives. Their interest is primarily egocentric. In the case of women, interest in death is likewise egocentric in the sense that their concern is how death will affect them and the pattern of their lives. Their interest, however, is concentrated on their husband's death rather than on their own. Many engage in what was being called a rehearsal for widowhood. In this rehearsal, their concern is focused on how they will manage financially when their husbands die, where they will live, what they will do with their time, etc. While some women unquestionably are interested in their own death, more it has been reported are interested in the death of their husbands. Hazard to personal and social adjustment in old age. At few times during the lifespan are there more potentially serious hazards to good personal and social adjustment than there are in old age. As an example of this is elderly people are seldom prepared for the hazard of accidents which are so common in old age, nor are they taught how to avoid them. Similarly, they given help in learning to use their increased amount of leisure time in ways that are compatible with their declining strength and energy and their decreased incomes. Physical hazards. All the common hazards to physical well-being at earlier ages not only are more common during old age, but also affect a larger proportion of individuals. In addition to these common hazards, there are some that are largely limited to the old age groups. What these hazards are and their causes and effects are disease and physical handicaps, malnutrition, dental disorders, sexual deprivation, and accidents. Disease and physical handicaps. Elderly people are most commonly afflicted by circulatory disturbance, metabolic disorders, involutional mental disorders, disorders of joints, tumors, both benign and malignant, heart disease, rheumatism, arthritis, visual and hearing impairments, hypertension, gait disorders, and mental and nervous conditions. Next is malnutrition. Malnutrition in all age is due more psychological than to economic causes. The most common psychological causes are lack of appetite resulting from anxiety and depression, not wanting to eat alone, and food aversion stemming from earlier prejudices even when their food intake is not deficient, qualitatively or quantitatively. Many older people do not get the full value from their food because of malabsorption resulting from digestive or intestinal disturbance or failure of the endocrine system to function as it formerly did. Next is dental disorder. Sooner or later, most elderly people lose some or all of their teeth. Those who must wear dentures often have difficulty in chewing foods that are rich in proteins, such as meat, and may concentrate on those high in carbohydrates. Chewing difficulties also encourage the swallowing of larger and coarser food masses, which may lead to digestive disorders. Ill-fitting dentures or the absence of teeth often causes lisping and slurring, which interferes with the older person's speech and causes embarrassment. Next is sexual deprivation. Sexual deprivation or unfavorable attitudes towards sex in all age affect the old person in much the same way that emotion deprivation affects the young child. Happily married elderly people are healthier and live longer than those who never married, who have lost a spouse, or who become sexually inactive. Next is accidents. Older people are generally more accident prone than younger ones, even when the accidents are not fatal. They frequently leave the individual disabled for life. Falls which may be due to environmental obstacle or to dizziness, giddiness, weakness, or defective vision are the most common accidents among older women, while older men are most commonly involved in motor vehicle accidents, either as drivers or as pedestrian accidents, caused by far or almost common in old age. In addition to real physical hazard, there are imaginary ones. Many older people suffer from imaginary illness and concentrate on any ache or pain they may have, thus exaggerating it out all the proportion, talking about aches, pains, medicines, and doctors, a favorite pastime of many old people. It serves as a means of attracting attention to themselves and of winning sympathy from others. Psychological hazards. There are also a number of psychological hazards characteristics of old age. As is true of the physical hazards, psychological hazards are not only more likely to occur during old age than during the younger years of the lifespan, but their impact on personal and social adjustment is greater. Of the many psychological hazards characteristic of old age, the following are the most common and the most serious. Acceptance of cultural stereotypes of elderly. The first psychological hazard is acceptance of the traditional beliefs and cultural stereotypes of the age. This is hazardous because it encourages the elderly to feel inadequate and inferior. Even worse, it tends to stifle their motivation to do what they are capable of doing. For example, elderly people who believe that they are too old to learn new skills because you can teach an old dog new tricks will be at disadvantage if they seek full a part-time employment after retirement or if they are encouraged to pursue a new hobby to fill their leisure time. Effects of physical changes of aging. The second psychological hazards or old age stem from feelings of inferiority and inadequacy that come with physical changes. The loss of an attractive sex-appropriate appearance may lead both men and women to fear rejection by the social group. Loss of hearings interferes with communication with other people. In addition, many older people have difficulty in speaking because of missing teeth and poorly fitted dentures. This also proves to be a barrier to communication and to social relationships. Changes in life patterns. The necessity for establishing a different, more appropriate pattern of life is the third psychological hazard many elderly people face. They may, for example, no longer need a large home now. Changes in life patterns. The necessity for establishing a different, more appropriate patterns of life is the third psychological hazard. Many elderly people face they may, for example, no longer need as large a home now that their children are grown and have homes of their own. However, many older people cling to their homes and possessions and to lifestyles associated with them. Tendency to sleep mentally. The fourth psychological hazard is the suspicion of realization that mental decline has started to set in. Many elderly people suspect or realize that they are becoming somewhat forgetful, that they have difficulty learning new names or facts, and that they cannot hold up under pressure as well as they used to. They may come to think that they are sleeping mentally, and this encourages them in their belief that they are too old to learn anything new. Instead of adjusting their activities to conform to their mental state, they withdraw from all activities that might involve competition with younger people, and thus they experience all the problems described earlier that social disengagement brings. Feeling of guilt about idleness. The fifth psychological hazard is guilt about not working while other people still are. Many older people of the day who grow up in a more work-oriented society feel guilty after retirement or after their home responsibilities have diminished. They want to do something useful but may shy away from community activities planned for older citizens because they regard them as make work or forms of recreation rather than real work. This they do even when they want to the companionship these activities will provide because most elderly people need to feel useful if they are to be happy and well-adjusted attempts are made to get them interested in doing volunteer work in their communities. Volunteer work, it is claimed, is suitable substitute for the retired person's former occupation because it presents a personal challenge for the individual, thus generating self-respect while at the same time winning social approval and esteem. Elderly men, on the whole, tend to be less willing to engage in volunteer community work than women. This is partly because they have become accustomed to being paid for their service and thus resist working for nothing, and partly because they associate volunteer work with a feminine role. The cultural stereotype of the volunteer as a dilettante who dabbles in this work to kill time has strong influence on the attitudes of those who have lived a work-oriented life and who shun any substitute that does not conform to their earlier values. Reduced income. The sixth psychological hazard is the result of reduced income. After retirement, many elderly people are unable to afford the leisure time activities they consider worthwhile, such as attending lectures or concerts or participating in various community activities. If they must rely upon television for entertainment, they often find that the majority of the programs are youth or young adults oriented. As such, they offer little or interested to the elderly. Women, even more than men, find a reduced income a hazard to their personal and social adjustment. Women, even more than men, find a reduced income a hazard to their personal and social adjustment. It is especially serious during widowhood if the husband's former pensions end with their death. Social disengagement, the seventh and by far the most serious psychological hazard in the old age is social disengagement. As was explained earlier, this may be voluntary, but far more often it is involuntary. Due to poor health, limited financial resources, or other conditions over which the elderly have little or no control. Perhaps the best way to emphasize the hazardous nature of social disengagement is to point out the benefits the social belonging and participation in social activities bring to the elderly. Studies of members in different types of voluntary association or in senior citizens centers have revealed that active participation in these groups contributes greatly to psychological well-being as shown in an increase in life satisfaction. Some elderly people gain adequate satisfaction from social contacts with family members and relatives, and consequently do not experience the ill effects of social disengagement. Some substitutes indirect social contacts as through telephone conversation for direct face-to-face social interaction, but they are rarely as satisfying as direct interaction. Because social contacts are especially important for women after their husbands retire or die, social disengagements becomes a serious hazards to personal and social adjustments. The elderly who are disengaged, either voluntarily or involuntarily, become socially isolated. As a result, they lack the social support they had in times of trouble or stress when they were younger. This is especially serious if they are widowed or have few family members to turn to with their problems. That's all, and I hope you learned a lot in this video.
Hello everyone, I'm John Paul Dilawangan and I will be discussing to all of you is all about chapter 14, the old age, vocational and family adjustments. At the end of this discussion, you should be able to understand the difficulties many older people experience in adjusting to retirement and the conditions that influence these adjustments. Second, appreciate the adjustments older people must make to the many changes in family life and how successfully or unsuccessfully they make these adjustments. Third and last is realize how older people feel about their jobs, what vocational opportunities are available to them, and how successfully they perform their work. Two of the most difficult developmental tasks of old age are work and family life. The older men and women face adjustment problems in these areas that are similar in some respects to those they faced earlier, but that are unique in many ways. Furthermore, they have the problem of adjusting to retirement, which for most elderly people comes soon after old age sets in. In the family, the older men and women must adjust to depending on each other for companionship, to the lack of contact with and influence over their children, and often to the loss of a spouse. The unmarried elderly people often face adjustment problems that are more serious than the ones confronting those who are married or who have a loss of a spouse. Vocational and family adjustments in old age are complicated by economic factors, which play a far more important role now than they did earlier. Next is the vocational adjustments in old age. So the older men are more interested in steady work than in advancement, which they realize is not likely to be forthcoming. And as a result, they are usually more satisfied with their jobs than younger men. Even knowing that retirement is imminent, it does not affect their attitudes toward their work if they enjoy what they are doing. In even women who did not work during early adulthood, when they were preoccupied with housework and child care, often return to work during middle age and find it satisfactory compensation for diminished home and family responsibilities. However, the older women tend to be less satisfied with their jobs than men. It is because the only jobs available to them are even less interesting and less challenging than those older men who shift to other jobs during middle age. And as a result, the older women are less satisfied with the jobs they have and are less disturbed at the thought of retirement than older men. Attitudes toward work. Attitudes toward work are important at all ages, but especially so during old age when they affect not only the quality of their work performed but also the attitudes toward impending retirement. And according to Havikhurst, he pointed out that in old age, the attitudes toward work are at the basis of the desire to work, which fall roughly into two categories. And what are these two categories? So these are the two attitudes towards the job. These are the society maintaining attitude and also the ego involving attitude. So in society maintaining attitude toward their work, it means that they spend most of their time in their leisure time than their job. While in ego involving attitude, they spend more of their time on their job than their leisure time. Next is the conditions limiting employment opportunities for older workers. And these conditions are the compulsory retirement, the hiring policies, pension plans, social attitudes, fluctuations in business cycles, kinds of work, and sex. So the first one is the compulsory retirement. In compulsory retirement, because most of the industries or the businesses requires workers to retire at a certain fixed ages, ranging from 60 to 70 years old. And also they do not want to hire men or women who are approaching the mandatory retirement age because of the time, energy, and expenses that would be involved in training them for the jobs. Next, the second one is the hiring policies. So when the personal departments of businesses are in the hands of the younger people, the difficulties of the older workers in finding employment are greatly increased. Third is the pension plans. There is a close correlation between the existence of a pension plan in business and the failure to make use of workers over 65 years of age. The fourth one is the social attitudes. There is a belief that the older workers are accident prone and they are too slow to keep pace with younger workers, and also retraining them to use the modern techniques, which against employing older workers. The fifth one is the fluctuations in business cycles. So when the business conditions are poor, the older workers are generally the first one to be laid off and replaced by younger workers when the situation improves. Next is the kind of work. So the period of employment of workers in executive positions is limited by retirement policies. Even if you are skilled, semi-skilled, and unskilled types of workers, you may find that their strength and speed decrease with age, and that usefulness to their employers also decreases as a result. So the old age people have a limited access, especially in getting or having the executive positions because they approaching to the mandatory retirement age. The last one is sex. So it is said that the women, more than men, generally find it more difficult to hold their jobs or to get new ones as they grow older. The part-time work in offices or stores and domestic works are among the few vocational opportunities open to older women. Vocational opportunities for older workers. Unfortunately, when older men and women lost their jobs, often through no fault of their own, they find that there are very few job opportunities open to them, even if they are eager to work and are able to do so. This is true also of those who would like to change jobs because they are dissatisfied with the jobs they now have. As explained in chapter 12, that the vocational opportunities of the middle-aged people are rapidly decreasing, and by the mid to late 50s, it is very difficult for them to get a new job and also often impossible. If the older workers are fortunate enough to get a job, they get the monotonous or dead-end jobs which are far below the level of their abilities and training, which they do not find them satisfying. Relatively a few jobs open to elderly people are highly skilled or involve responsibilities. In business and industry, only the worst jobs are usually available to the older workers. Example for it is janitor. This means that on the whole level, no, the older workers are overrepresented at the bottom of the earning scale and underrepresented at the top. Appraisal of older workers. The older workers, it has been reported that they are less restless and less likely to be dissatisfied with their jobs than the younger workers. While to the volume of their work may be less than the younger workers, the quality is generally higher. They make fewer mistakes, partly because their judgment is better and partly because they work at a slower speed. For example, that the older workers because the older workers have a more experience, they tend to do things with less waste motion than the younger, less experienced workers. This compensates for their slower work speed. They are also less inclined to be preoccupied with problems related to their personal lives than younger workers whose interests are often centered around romance and their families. There is greater conscientiousness because their attitude is more mature and their desire to keep their jobs, and as a result, they are generally more dependable. It means according to the study or the assessment from the older workers na kung saan is mas pagdating sa quality ng trabaho is mas higher yung greatness ng quality na pinapakita ng mga older workers kaysa sa mga younger workers. Kinds of retirement. Retirement may be voluntary or compulsory. Some workers retire voluntarily, often before the age of compulsory retirement. This they do because of health or a desire to spend the remaining years of their lives doing things that are more meaningful to them than their jobs. For others, retirement is involuntary or compulsory. The organization, the industry, or in business for which the individual works set an age at which all its workers must retire, regardless of whether they want to or not. Those who would prefer to remain on the job but are forced out at the compulsory retirement age often show resentment and as a result have little motivation to make good adjustments to retirement. While most workers retire at the regular compulsory retirement age, there is a growing trend to take an early retirement. Those who take early retirement may do so, as in the as in the case of voluntary retirement for health reasons or because they want to spend the remaining years of their lives doing things that are more meaningful and more enjoyable to them than their jobs. Sometimes, ang early retirement is also a compulsory retirement lalo na dahil ang kanilang management ay gusto magpalit ng mga workers or they are first force nila yung kanilang mga older workers na alisin at palitan ng mga younger workers. And some workers may resent being forced out of their jobs and into retirement before the compulsory retirement age, but others are satisfied to do so. So their satisfaction depends not so much on their desire to continue working as on their financial situation in the form of a pension and whether or not they have outside interests. Conditions affecting adjustment to retirement. Workers who retire voluntarily adjust better than those who are forced to retire, especially if they want to continue to work. Most workers find that tapering off is better than abruptly ending patterns of work and leaving established many years earlier. A good economic status would make it possible to live comfortably and enjoy meaningful recreations is essential to good adjustment to retirement. Poor health at the time of retirement facilitates adjustment while good health is likely to militate against it. Workers who develop interest in substitute activities that are meaningful to them and which provide many of the satisfactions they formerly derived from work will not find adjustment to retirement as emotionally disturbing as those who fail to develop substitute interests. A happy marital status aids adjustment to retirement, while a frictional one militates against it. Adjustments to change in family life in old age. The pattern of family life established in early adulthood starts to change with the onset of middle age. These changes are made more pronounced by retirement with accompanying reduced income or by the death of a spouse in old age. Of the many adjustments centering around family relationships that the elderly person must make, the five most important involve relationships with the spouse. And these are the changes in sexual behavior, relationships with offspring, parental dependency, and lastly, the relationships with grandchildren. Relationship with spouse. The first important adjustment centering around family relationships elderly people must make is establishing good relationships with their spouses. With the role change from worker to retiree, most men spend much more of their time at home than they ever did before. If their relationships with their wives are good, this will contribute to the happiness of both, while if the relationship are strained, friction is increased by constant contacts. Because many retired men feel lost and do not know what to do with their free time, they tend to be depressed and unhappy. Their feelings may show being critical, fault-finding, and irritable in their treatment of their wives. Many of them resent any suggestion that they assume some of the household responsibilities on the grounds that that is women's work. Changes in sexual behavior. The second most important adjustment centering around family relationships elderly people must make are changes in sexual behavior. These adjustments are made difficult by the popular belief that impotence and lack of interest in sex are natural accompaniments of aging, and there is an evidence that changes in sexual behavior among the elderly people are due more to psychological than to physical causes. And there is also an evidence that many middle-aged women, freed from the fear of pregnancy, develops a new interest in sex. This interest, when inhibited by unfavorable attitudes, continues into old age. This is the common factors affecting sexual behavior in old age. So the first common factor is the pattern of earlier sexual behavior. So the people who derived enjoyment from sexual behavior and were sexually active during the earlier years of their marriage continue to be sexually more active in old age than those who were less active earlier. The second one is the compatibility of spouses. When there is a close bond between husband and wife built on mutual interests and respect, the desire for intercourse is much more stronger than a frictional relationship exists. The third one is social attitudes. Unfavorable social attitudes toward sex in old age make many elderly men and women feel that interest in sexual matters not only is not nice but may even be perverted. The fourth one is the marital status. So the married people are likely to continue sexual activity into old age. Those who are single or divorced or whose spouses have died usually do not have a strong enough sex drive to make them seek new sex partners. The fifth is the preoccupation with outside problems. When either or both spouses are preoccupied with financial, family, or other problems, it tends to weaken sexual desire. If they eat or drink excessively in order to escape from these problems, their sexual desires are further weakened. So halimbawa nito is kapag ang dalawang mag-asawa na nasa nakabilang sa old age ay naiisip ng kanilang financial problem, family problem or iba pang problema ay mababawasan yung pagkakaroon nila ng sexual intercourse. At lalong-lalo na kapag nasusobra na yung pagkain or yung pag-drink ng mga alcohol drinks is nababawasan yung sexual desires nila. Kaya dahil yun yung paraan nila para matakasan yung problema, kaya ang ending pagdating nila sa kanilang mga bahay ay diretso tulog na. Sixth one is the over-familiarity. Being together too much over a long period of time tends to deaden a couple's sexual desire in old age. Halimbawa nito, kapag ang isang mag-asawa ay nagsasama na ng sobrang tagal, kaya yung kanilang sexual desire ay nadididen o nagiging kakaroon ng less intense pagdating sa sexual intercourse. The last one of common factors affecting sexual behavior in old age is the impotence. Many men who find themselves impotent on occasion, regardless of the condition that gave rise to it, withdraw from further sexual activity to avoid the ego-shattering experience of repeated episodes of sexual inadequacy. So it means kapag ang lalaki ay nagkakaroon ng inability to have an erection or orgasm, kaya ang nangyayari pagdating na kanilang old age is nababawasan yung pagkakaroon nila ng sexual intercourse dahil na rin para maiwasan yung masaktan yung kanilang ego lalo na dahil bilang lalaki yes talagang napakasakit nun lalo na pag impotent ka na. Relationships with offspring. The third important adjustment centering around family relationships elderly people must make are changes in relationships with their offspring. The relationships of elderly people with their offspring are far less satisfactory than many believed possible, even during middle age when these relationships may have begun to deteriorate. So when the parents are willing to shift their attitudes toward their children to suit the children's age and their developmental level, the chances of the parent-child relationships are higher, and as the years go on, that the person will find much satisfaction in the companionship of sons and daughters. However, if ang isang parent ay unwilling over the years to adjust their attitude para ma-meet yung needs ng kanilang growing children, ay mag-end up sila pagdating ng kanilang katandaan ay magiging isa silang lonely. Parental dependency. The fourth important adjustment centering around family relationships elderly people must make is the possibility of parental dependency. Role reversal, as has been stressed before, are very difficult for older people to make successfully. One role reversal that is especially difficult is that of becoming dependent on grown children. Many elderly people, even when they depend on their children for financial support and companionship, are unable or unwilling to relinquish their role of authority over their children. So the elderly parents who are happily married and have interests of their own are emotionally less dependent on their children than those whose marriages are unhappy or who have failed to develop interests to occupy the time formerly developed through parental roles. Relationships with grandchildren. The fifth most important adjustment centering around family relationships elderly people must make is the type of relationships they will have with their grandchildren. So by the time men and women reach old age, their grandchildren may be teenagers or young adults. So in this case, the grandparents are no longer called upon to help with their care. So if the grandparents live far away from the grandchildren, as is often the case today, they will have only occasional contacts with them, unless the grandparents go to live in the parents' home. Even then, the grandchildren eventually go away to college or establish homes of their own, and thus many have fewer contacts with their grandparents than they did when they were younger. So as a result, there is rapidly changing values, attitudes, patterns of dress and behavior, and moral standards. Grandparents often find that there is a gap between them and their grandchildren that is too great to bridge. Assessment of adjustment to changes in family life. People who feel generally happily married find that their marriages become more satisfying to them as they grow older. So their satisfaction with marriage among older people is increased if their children are successful and happily married, and if they have good relationships with their grandchildren, even if their contacts with them are infrequent. Adjustment to loss of a spouse in old age. One of the major adjustments elderly people must make is to the loss of their spouse. Loss of a spouse may be due to death or divorce, because it is customary for women to marry men their own age or older, and because men, on the average, die sooner than women. Widowhood in old age is far more common for women than for men. People in their 60s and 70s do get divorced, but far less frequently than younger people. It has been estimated that 50% of 60-year-old women are widows, while 85% of women aged 85 are widows. There are no statistics available concerning the number of men of comparable ages who are widowers, but there is reason to believe that because widowers at every age remarry more than widows do, the percentages will be far less. Adjustment to the death of a spouse or to divorce is difficult for men and women in old age because of that at this time, all adjustments are increasingly difficult to make. Adjustment problems for men and women. When men lost their wives shortly after retirement, it greatly increases their difficulties in adjusting to retirement because they must adjust to widowhood. It is a major adjustment for most men simultaneously. So the problems for men, especially if there is a loss of a spouse or a divorce, the first one is because old age is a period during which interests narrow. Elderly men who are left alone find it difficult to compensate for their loneliness by developing new interests as readily as they did when they were younger. Second, even though widowers may not always have been satisfied with their marriages, they could count on their wives to provide companionship, to take care of their physical needs, and to manage their homes.
And last, the problem of where to live is a thorny one for many widowers and in most cases one of their major adjustment problems. For women, the adjustment problems of widowhood are very often complicated by decreased income unless their husbands carried life insurance policies or had pensions that provided for the widow of the deceased. So the major adjustment problems widows face are influenced by income. A decreased income may and frequently does necessitate giving up interests that otherwise may have been retained. Second, a decreased income affects a widow's social life. And lastly, decreased income often means moving into smaller and less desirable living quarters, such as going to live with a married child or living in an institution. Remarriage in old age. One of the ways older people try to solve the problems of loneliness and sexual deprivation brought on by the loss of a spouse is by remarrying. Remarriage is more common now than in the past, partly because social attitudes toward remarriage in old age are more favorable than they formerly were, especially when loss of a spouse was due to divorce, and partly because there are more older people alive today than in the past. Age differences in remarriage. It has been reported that older men usually select younger women when they remarry, while both men and women in their later years do marry individuals of approximately similar age. The number of those who marry younger people is surprisingly large. Adjustment problems of remarriage. While marriage at any age brings with it problems of adjustment, remarriage always has certain characteristics problem. This is especially true of remarriage in old age. Among the common problems are adjusting to the new spouse, to the new set of relatives, to a new home in the same community, and sometimes to a new community. In addition to these problems, there is likely to be discouragement, if not open criticism, of the remarriage on the part of the children of either the man or woman. That is the end of my discussion. Thank you and God bless.
Hi everyone, my name is Datual Nurayan A. Omar, and for today, I will share with you about remarriage in old age.
Remarriage in old age. Remarriage among the elderly is becoming more frequent and more socially acceptable than it formerly was. While some remarriage in old age do not work out satisfactorily for those involved or for members of their families, remarriage late in life is reported to be very successful. Condition contributing to the adjustment to remarriage in old age. A happy first marriage. Knowing what traits and behavior pattern to look for in a potential mate. A desire to marry because of love and a need for companionship other than for the reason of convenience or financial support. An interest in continuing sexual behavior. A similarity of education and social backgrounds. Adequate income. Approval of the marriage by offspring and friends. Reasonably good health and a lack of disabling physical condition on the part of both spouses. Avoidance of uprooting from area where grown children, relatives, and friends live. Cohabitation in old age. Remarriage is a common and socially approved solution to the problems of loneliness and sexual deprivation posed by loss of spouse. Some older people try to solve the problems engendered by the loss of spouse by living together without marriage. This is called cohabitation. Unlike many young people who usually live together to determine whether they are compatible before actually marrying, older people are more often motivated by practical financial consideration. Adjustment to singlehood in old age. The popular belief that an old person who has never married will face an unhappy, lonely old age not borne out by real experience. The single man has learned over the years to develop interests and become involved in activities to compensate for the lack of companionship of a family of his own. As a result, he is less likely to face lonely old age than a man who actually married, whose interest is centered around his home and family, and who now in old age may find himself without wife and children. The modern, older single woman builds up a life of their own, just as a man does. As a result, she has much to keep her happy and occupied in old age. Living arrangement for the elderly. Pattern of living vary more in old age than in the middle age. When the pattern is well standardized, 5 patterns are common among the elderly today. A married couple living alone, a person living alone in his or her own home, 2 or more members of the same generation living together in a non-marital relationship, such as brothers and sisters or friends, a widow or widower living with a married child and perhaps grandchildren, and an elderly person living in a home for aged or in a club or hotel. Some conditions influence choice of living arrangement for the elderly. Economic status, marital status, health, ease of caring, sex, children, desire of companionship, and climate. Needs in living arrangement. The needs and wants of the elderly people vary greatly, therefore, living arrangements must vary as well. However, almost all elderly people have certain physical and psychological needs that must be met by their living arrangement if the arrangements are to maintain health and happiness. Types of living arrangement. Today, the growing realization of the importance of living arrangements suited to the physical and psychological needs of the elderly has resulted in the growth of new living quarters plans specifically for the elderly. Among the form of living arrangement for the elderly in America today are apartments in buildings limited to those 60 of age and older. Condos minimum which is usually those 55 to 60 years of age may purchase. Institution for the elderly such as retirement settlement consisting of individuals' houses, apartment, or both located in an area of city or a suburban community which is suitable near the shopping centers, with a place for dining out, amusement, and retirement communities which are self-contained communities limited to those who are 55 to 60 years old. Physical and psychological needs in living arrangement for the elderly. Physical needs. Psychological needs. Institutional living for the elderly. When wealth, economic status, or other conditions make it possible for them to continue living in their own homes, and if there is no family members who can or will offer them a place to live, elderly people must take up residence in an institutional for the aged. Advantages and disadvantages of institutional living for the elderly. Geographic mobility in old age. Elderly people may have to move from place to place to 10 or 15 years until they finally find living quarters that meets their needs whether they be in the home of a grown child, in a retirement community, or an institution. Vocational and family life hazard of old age. While hazards are associated with every age in the lifespan, as has been pointed out repeatedly, the difference between the hazard of old age and those of the younger ages is that elderly people have little or no control over the conditions that are primarily responsible for this hazard. Vocational hazards. These are the two important vocational hazards in old age. Prevention from working. There are three reasons why older people may be prevented from working. First, a lack of vocational opportunities for the older worker. Second, the unemployment becomes more serious as workers grow older. Third, the third condition creating difficulties of the elderly who want to work is the necessity of retiring at a certain age. Retirement. Even when they are prepared for retirement, older people face what Erikson has called the identity crisis. Not unlike the other they face in adolescence when they were threatened sometimes as a child and sometimes as an adult. Conditions contributing to the seriousness of unemployment in old age. Kind of work. New job versus job shift. Necessity for the restraining. Minority group status. Family life hazards. Sexual deprivation. The first family life hazard in old age is sexual deprivation. Loneliness. The second almost universal family life hazard to good adjustment in old age is loneliness. Living arrangement. The third major family life hazard in old age involves living arrangement. Role changes. The fourth major family life hazard in old age, and unquestionably one of the most serious, is the necessity of making role change. Common substitute sources of sexual satisfaction in old age. First, masturbation. Second, erotic dreams and daydreams. Third, thinking about sex. Fourth, sexual recrudescence. Assessment of adjustment to old age. How successfully men and women will adjust to the problems arising from the physical and the mental changes that is accompany aging, and from the changes in status that occur at this time will be influenced by many factors, some which are beyond their control. Some factors influencing adjustment to old age. Preparation for the old age, earlier experience, satisfaction of needs, retention of old friendships, grown children, social attitudes, personal attitudes, method of adjustments, health conditions, living conditions, and economic conditions. Quality of behavior patterns. The first criterion that can be used to assess this kind of adjustment elderly people make is quality of their behavior. According to the activity theory, men and women should maintain the attitude and the activities of middle age as long as possible, and then find the substitutes for the activities they must give up. And according to the disengagement theory, men and women curtail their voluntary or involuntary their involvement in the activities of middle age, They cut down their direct contact with people. For example, they feel carefree to do as they please, and when they please, they are little influenced by opinions of others. And they do things that are important to them regardless of how the social group feels about them. Changes in emotional behavior. The second criterion that may be used to assess this kind of adjustment elderly people makes is the change that takes place in their emotional behavior. Studies of elderly people have shown that they tend to be apathetic in their affective life. They are less responsible than they were when they were younger and show less enthusiasm. They are less responsible than they were when they are younger. Typically, their emotions responses are more specific, less varied, and less appropriate to the occasion than those younger people. Common characteristics of good and poor adjustment in old age. Good adjustment. Poor adjustment.
Good morning, everyone. I am Alea Jehan D. Jabbar. I'm going to discuss the personal changes. So, what is a personal changes? A personal changes is a comfortably demonstrating a new behavior that produces new results in your life, which in turn causes you to feel differently. It is popularly believed that all old people, regardless of their younger personality patterns, develop into an ogre-like creature who are mean, stingy, quarrelsome, demanding, selfish, self-centered, egotistical, generally impossible to live with. Furthermore, it is popularly believed also that if old people live long enough, their personalities will become childlike in the closing of years of life. It is also called as senile, that requiring that they will be treated like a children. As long ago as Plato's time, it was recognized that the personality pattern prior to the old age influenced people's reaction to the old age. This point of view has now been substantiated by modern studies of personality, which emphasize that although changes in personality do occur, they are quantitative rather than a qualitative. So, what causes of a personal changes? The self-concept primarily affects the personality pattern. Thus, it will determine the quality and the quantity of a change. Changes in a self-concept are due to mainly subjective awareness of aging on the part of the elderly. In time, they develop personality patterns that conform to social expectations. The treatment that the elderly receive from members of the social group because of their age are also contributes to the changes in the self-concept. What are the effects of radical changes? So, the effects of the radical changes in the self-concept at any age and for any reason is likely to lead in a personality structure of a minor or major severity. Such breakdowns are consist of disorders such as disturbance of memory and common neuroses such as anxiety. Personality breakdown, as in mental disease, increase greatly with advancing age. When breakdown in personality occurs in the old age, it may lead to criminal behavior or suicidal tendencies. Most personality breakdowns in old age are a result of social conditions which give rise to feelings of insecurity. So, what is a happiness? Happiness is the fourth criterion that may be used to assess the kind of adjustment elderly people make this a degree of self-satisfaction or happiness they experience. According to Erickson, old age is characterized by their ego or despair. Even those who become successful or reasonably successful may become dissatisfied in old age. Erickson has commented, despair is there for everyone, no matter how much he has accomplished. Causes of happiness in the old age. As is true of other times in lifespan, happiness in old age depends upon fulfillment of the 3 A's of happiness. 3 A of happiness are acceptance, affection, and achievement. This means unless the elderly have made reasonably good adjustments in the past and have been able to maintain a high degree of ego integrity, have far less chances of become happiness. It is important that people derive happiness from different things experienced as they grow older. Barrett has described what makes elderly people happy in this way. Barrett's description of what makes elderly people happy: financially security, able to utilize his free time constructively, happy in his social contacts, and able to contribute social services. Condition contributing to happiness. A favorable attitude toward old age developed as a result of earlier pleasurable contacts with elderly people, happy memories of a childhood or an adulthood, freedom to pursue a desired lifestyle without outside interference, a realistic attitude, and acceptance of physical and psychological changes that aging inevitably brings, acceptance of self and present living condition even if these fall below expectations, an opportunity to establish a satisfying, social, acceptable pattern of life, continued participating in interesting, meaningful activities, acceptance by and respect from the social group, a feeling of satisfaction with present status and past achievements, satisfaction with marital status of sex life, reasonably good health without chronic health problems, enjoyment of recreational activities with relatives and friends, productive activities whether in housework or volunteer services, a financial situation adequate to meet needs and wants. So let's discuss the chapter highlights. First, the vocational adjustments in old age are markedly influenced by workers' attitudes. The two most common types, which are society maintaining work attitudes, attitudes characterized by little or no interest in work per se but in the paychecks, and ego involving work attitudes, attitudes characterized by great personal satisfaction, self-respect, and sense of worth. Second, employment opportunities for older workers are limited by such as factors as compulsory retirement, hiring practices, pensions plans, social attitudes toward the elderly, business cycles, sex of the worker, and the kind of work. Retirement, which involves role changes as well as changes in interest, values, and life patterns, may be voluntary or compulsory, early or regular. Attitudes toward retirement are influenced by a number of conditions, the three most important of which are the economic status of the individual, attitudes of significant people, especially family members, toward the individual's retirement, and the satisfaction of the retiree derives from the substitute activities. Changes in family life patterns made more pronounced by retirement, reduced income, or death of a spouse, requiring 5 major adjustments: relationships with a spouse, changes in social behaviors, relationship with offspring and with grandchildren, and the role reversal or parental dependency on the offspring. Adjustments to lose a spouse by death or divorce in old age necessitates different types of adjustments for men and for women, and those for men complicated by loneliness, and need for dependency, and for the women by decreased income. There are many adjustments problems with a remarriage in old age, the most common of which are adjustments to a new spouse, to new a set of relatives, and often to a new home or a new community. Irritation in old age, which has been increasing in recent years, especially in large urban centers, is usually motivated by practical and financial consideration as compared with a desire to determine compatibility, the usual motivation for cohabitation in younger people. Single men and women tend in old age to be better adjusted and happier than those who lose a mate because over the years they have established interests and friendships that take the place of the family relationships that are so absorbing to married individuals. There are 5 common patterns of living arrangements for elderly in the American culture of today. Geographic mobility in old age, often necessitated by economic, health, or family conditions, or by changes in marital status as happens with divorce or death of a spouse, is more often involuntary than voluntary. The 2 most common and most serious vocational hazards in old age are inclusion from work due to lack of vocational opportunities or unemployment, even though one wants to work, and retirement, especially when it is involuntary or early due to conditions over which the individual has no control or is unprepared for. The most common family life hazard of old age are sexual deprivation, loneliness, especially when there is a loss of a spouse due to divorce or a death, which the individual has no control or is unprepared for. The most common family life hazard of old age are sexual deprivation, loneliness, especially when there is a loss of a spouse due to divorce or a death, changes in living arrangements that are often involuntary, and the necessities for making role changes due to changes in health, economic status, or living conditions. There are 4 criteria commonly used to assess adjustments to old age of the part of both men and women: the quality of behavior pattern, whether active or characterized by involuntary disengagement, changes in emotional behavior, personality changes, and self-satisfaction or happiness, changes in living arrangements that are often involuntary, and the necessities for making role changes due to changes in health, economic status, or living conditions. There are 4 criteria commonly used to assess adjustments to old age of the part of both men and women: the quality of behavior pattern, whether active or characterized by involuntary disengagement, changes in emotional behavior, personality changes, and self-satisfaction or happiness. Happiness in old age is characterized by continued activity, while unhappiness is influenced by disengagement, either voluntary or involuntary. That's all, and thank you for listening. Once again, I am Alea Jehan Jabar. Thank you.